The crowbar caught me right across the jaw, sent me sprawling into the gravel behind the warehouse, blood already filling my mouth as I tried to figure out how 3 kids in Halloween masks had turned my quiet security job into a nightmare I'd never wake up from. My name's Danny, and I'd been working security at the industrial complex outside Portland for about 8 months when it happened. Nothing fancy. Just me, a flashlight, and a bunch of empty buildings that used to manufacture electronics back in the day. Most nights were dead quiet, just the sound of rain on metal roofs and my boots echoing through empty hallways. The pay was decent enough to keep my apartment and my car running, which was all I really needed at 26. I'd take the overnight shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., because nobody else wanted it. And honestly, I preferred the solitude. No boss breathing down my neck, no coworkers making small talk. Just me and the darkness. That Tuesday started like any other. Pacific Northwest autumn, which meant the rain hadn't stopped for 3 weeks straight. I grabbed my thermos of coffee, checked my equipment, and settled into the security office to watch the camera feeds, 12 screens showing different angles of the complex. Loading docks, parking areas, the main entrances. Most of the time, the only movement was rats scurrying between buildings, or the occasional stray cat hunting for food. But around midnight, something caught my eye on camera 7. It was subtle at first, just a shadow moving near the back fence by the old assembly building. Could have been anything. Wind blowing trash, maybe a deer that wandered in from the woods. But then I saw it again. Deliberate movement, too coordinated to be random. I leaned closer to the monitor, squinting through the grainy black and white feed. The figure moved again, definitely human, crouched low and moving along the fence line. My heart started pumping a little faster. First real action I'd seen in months. I grabbed my radio and my mag light, threw on my rain jacket, and headed out into the storm. The complex was a maze of interconnected buildings and narrow alleys between them. Perfect place for someone to disappear if they knew what they were doing. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning everything slick and treacherous. I made my way toward the back fence, keeping my flashlight low so I wouldn't spook whoever was out there. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating puddles and abandoned equipment scattered around the loading area. Everything looked normal. Too normal. That's when I heard the snickering. It was quiet, almost lost in the sound of rain hitting metal, but it was definitely there. High-pitched, like kids trying not to laugh during a prank. I froze, listening hard, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. Then I saw them. 3 figures stepped out from behind a shipping container, all wearing those cheap plastic masks you get at Halloween stores. One looked like a skull, another some kind of demon face. The third was a clown with a cracked smile. They were young, I could tell by how they moved, all twitchy energy and false bravado. "Hey," I called out, raising my flashlight toward them. "This is private property. You need to leave. Now!" They didn't move, just stood there in the rain, water streaming off their masks, staring at me. The silence stretched on for what felt like minutes, just the sound of rain and my own breathing. Then the one in the skull mask raised something in his hand. I barely had time to register what it was before he swung, the crowbar catching me right across the jaw with a sickening crack. The pain exploded through my skull as I went down hard, my flashlight skittering across the wet pavement. Blood filled my mouth instantly, warm and metallic, mixing with the rainwater as I tried to push myself up. But before I could get my bearings, a boot caught me in the ribs, rolling me over onto my back. "Look what we got here," one of them said, his voice muffled by the mask. "Night watchman thinks he's tough." They surrounded me, 3 dark shapes against the stormy sky, their masks looking even more grotesque up close. The clown one giggled. a sound that made my skin crawl. "Please," I managed to spit out, along with a mouthful of blood. "Just take whatever you want and go." "Oh, we're not here for money," the demon-faced one said, kneeling down next to me. "We're here for fun." That's when I realized this wasn't just some kids looking for trouble. This was something much worse. The skull mask grabbed my radio and smashed it against the concrete. Then they started in on me for real. Fists and feet coming from all directions. I tried to fight back, even swung my flashlight at one of them, but they were too fast. Someone grabbed it and tossed it away before another kid punched me in the face. I felt my nose break with a wet crunch. I felt ribs crack under their boots. They were laughing the whole time, enjoying every second of it. "Stop fighting and it'll be over quicker," the clown one whispered in my ear, his breath hot against my face. But I couldn't stop. Something deep in my brain was screaming at me to survive, to fight back no matter how hopeless it seemed. I managed to grab one of their ankles and twist, heard him cry out as he went down. That just made them angrier. The skull one picked up my flashlight, the heavy mag light that had been my constant companion for months. He raised it high above his head, and I knew if it came down, I was done. "Wait," the demon mask said, grabbing his arm. "Not yet. Let's have some real fun first." They dragged me toward the old assembly building, my heels scraping against the pavement as I tried to resist. The door was already open. They'd planned this whole thing out. Inside, the building was pitch black except for what little light came through the broken skylights. Rain dripped steadily from the damaged roof, creating an irregular rhythm that echoed through the empty space. They threw me down next to an old conveyor belt, the metal cold and rusty against my back. I was starting to lose consciousness from the beating. Everything felt distant and dreamlike. "You know what the best part is?" the clown once said, pulling out a cell phone. "We're gonna film this. Show everyone what happens to heroes." The camera light came on, harsh and blinding in the darkness. I tried to turn my face away, but one of them grabbed my chin and forced me to look into the lens. "Say hi to the internet?" he laughed. That's when I snapped. Maybe it was the thought of my family seeing this. Maybe it was just pure animal instinct. But something inside me broke free, and I lunged at the closest one, the demon mask. We went down together, rolling across the concrete floor. I managed to get my hands on his mask and rip it off, revealing a baby-faced kid who couldn't have been more than 16. His eyes went wide with shock, like he'd never expected his victim to fight back. "Get him off me!" he screamed. The other two jumped on my back, trying to pull me away, but adrenaline had kicked in now. I threw them off and made a run for the door, my vision blurry with blood, my legs barely holding me up. I could hear them chasing after me, their footsteps splashing through puddles as they followed me out into the storm. But I had one advantage. I knew this complex better than they did. I cut between buildings, using every shortcut I'd learned during my months of patrol. My lungs were on fire, my broken ribs screaming with each breath, but I kept running. Behind me, I could hear them getting frustrated, their voices echoing off the walls as they lost track of me in the maze of alleys and loading docks. "Where'd he go?" one of them shouted. "Find him. We can't let him get away." But I was already at the main gate, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the lock. The security office was just 50 yards away. If I could make it there, I could call for help. The lock finally gave way, and I stumbled through the gate. Never been so happy to see the empty street beyond. I made it to the office and grabbed the landline, my fingers leaving bloody smears on the keypad as I dialed 911. "Portland Police? What's your emergency?" This is security at the Westfield Industrial Complex." I gasped into the phone. I've been attacked. 3 suspects. Still on the property. Sir, are you injured? Do you need an ambulance? I looked down at myself. Blood soaking through my uniform. My face swelling up like a balloon. Yeah, I need an ambulance. The police arrived first. 2 patrol cars with their lights flashing, illuminating the complex in red and blue. The paramedics were right behind them, loading me onto a stretcher and checking my vitals. The suspects are still in there, I told the officers. Building 7. The old assembly plant. They searched for hours. K9 units, helicopter with a searchlight, the whole works. But the kids were gone. Vanished into the Portland night like they'd never been there at all. At the hospital, the doctors told me I was lucky. Broken nose, 3 cracked ribs, concussion, and more stitches than I cared to count, but nothing that wouldn't heal. The psychological damage, though, that was something else entirely. I couldn't sleep for weeks after. Every shadow looked like a masked figure. Every sound in the dark made my heart race. I'd wake up in cold sweats, feeling phantom kicks to my ribs. My supervisor was sympathetic and gave me time off to recover, even offered to transfer me to a day shift. But the damage was done. I couldn't go back to that place, couldn't walk those dark hallways knowing what had happened there. I quit after a month and took a job at a shopping mall. Bright lights, lots of people around, security cameras everywhere. It paid less, but at least I could sleep at night. The cops never caught those kids. They had my blood on their clothes, my DNA under their fingernails. But without faces or names, they might as well have been ghosts. The case went cold after 6 months, filed away with all the other unsolved assaults that happen in the shadows. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, still playing their sick games with other victims. I hope not, but I know better than most that some monsters never get caught. I still work security, probably always will. But now I carry more than just a flashlight and a radio. The company doesn't need to know about the pepper spray in my belt or the knife in my boot, because if those masks ever show up again, I won't be running. I'll be ready. When that walk-in freezer door finally opened after 37 minutes, my 2 employees stumbled out with their hands covering their eyes, refusing to look at anything ever again, and I still don't know what those men did to them in there. My name's Robert, and I used to manage a chain of all-night diners scattered across rural Minnesota. The Midnight Express, we called them, little beacons of light on dark highways where truckers and insomniacs could get coffee and pie at 3 in the morning. The location off Highway 94 was our smallest. Just a counter, 6 booths, and a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people. But it was profitable. Steady stream of long-haul drivers and shift workers who needed food outside normal hours. I had 2 employees working that particular night, Amy and Craig. Amy was our best waitress. Been with us for 3 years. Could handle any crowd or any drunk who got too handsy. Craig was the night cook, the quiet guy in his 40s who made the best pancakes in 3 counties. They'd worked together long enough to have a rhythm. Amy taking orders and running food while Craig worked his magic in the kitchen. Never had any problems with them. No complaints from customers. No missing money from the register. That changed on November 15th. I was home in bed when my phone rang at 3:47 a.m. The caller ID showed it was the local police. Never a good sign when you run businesses that stay open all night. Mr. Patterson, this is Officer Williams with the Hennepin County Sheriff's Department. We need you to come down to your diner on Highway 94. There's been an incident. No. What kind of incident? I asked, already pulling on my clothes. I'd rather explain in person, sir. How quickly can you get here? The drive usually took 20 minutes. I made it in 12. Police cars were parked all around the diner, their red and blue lights painting the windows in garish colors. An ambulance was just pulling away. No sirens, which could mean good news or very bad news. Officer Williams met me at the door. A big guy with tired eyes who looked like he'd seen too much in his career. "Mr. Patterson, I need to ask you some questions about your security system. What happened? Are Amy and Craig okay?" "They're alive," he said carefully. "But they're in shock. Neither one is talking right now." He led me inside, and immediately I could see that something was very wrong. Chairs were overturned, food was scattered on the floor, but the register was closed and the safe in the back office was untouched. "Doesn't look like a robbery," I said. "No, sir, it doesn't." Williams pulled out a notebook. "We need to see your security footage. All of it." I led him to the small office behind the kitchen where we kept our recording equipment. It was old-fashioned stuff. Analog cameras feeding into a VHS system that I'd been meaning to upgrade for years. "The camera over the main dining area should show everything," I said, rewinding the tape to around 2:30 a.m. What we saw in that grainy black and white footage still gives me nightmares. 2:31 a.m. Amy was wiping down tables while Craig cleaned the grill. Normal late-night routine. The diner was empty except for them, which wasn't unusual for a Tuesday night in November. 2:33 a.m. The front door opened and two men walked in. They looked normal enough, middle-aged, wearing work clothes and baseball caps. One was tall and thin, the other shorter with a beard. They sat at the counter and Amy approached them with menus. 2:35 a.m. Amy took their order while Craig started cooking. Nothing unusual, just another couple of customers getting a late meal. 2:42 a.m. The men finished eating. The tall one paid the check while the bearded one used the restroom. Still perfectly normal. 2:44 a.m. And this is where everything went wrong. The bearded man came out of the restroom, but instead of heading for the door, he walked behind the counter. At the same time, the tall one stood up and pulled something from his jacket. A gun. Amy's hands went up immediately. I could see her mouth moving, probably telling them to take whatever they wanted. Craig dropped his spatula and backed against the wall. But here's the thing. They didn't go for the register, didn't demand money or threaten to hurt anyone. Instead, they motioned for Amy and Craig to walk toward the back of the diner, toward the walk-in freezer. "Jesus," Officer Williams muttered. "What are they doing?" All four of them disappeared from the camera's view as they entered the kitchen area. There was another camera back there, but it only covered the prep area, not the freezer itself. 2:46 a.m. All four figures moved through the kitchen camera's field of view. Amy and Craig had their hands raised. The two men were herding them toward the freezer with their weapons drawn. 2:47 a.m. They all disappeared into the freezer. The heavy steel door swung shut behind them, and then nothing. For 37 minutes, that freezer door stayed closed. No one came out. No one went in. The rest of the diner was completely empty, just chairs and tables sitting in the fluorescent light. I stared at the timestamp as it crawled by. 2:48, 2:55, 3:10, 3:20. What the hell were they doing in there for over half an hour? "This doesn't make sense," I said. "That freezer's maybe 8 feet by 10 feet. Barely room for 4 people to stand up." Officer Williams didn't answer. He just kept watching the screen with a grim expression. 3:24 a.m. Still nothing. Just that closed door and empty diner. Finally, at 3:24 a.m., the door opened. The two men walked out, but something was different about them. They moved slower, more deliberately. The tall one was adjusting his jacket, and the bearded one was wiping his hands on a rag he'd gotten from somewhere. They walked back through the kitchen, past the prep area, and out into the dining room. The camera showed them collecting their things from the counter, leaving money for their meal, and walking out the front door like nothing had happened. Just 2 customers finishing their late dinner. Amy and Craig didn't come out. The footage continued. Empty diner, closed freezer door, 3:30, 3:40, 3:50. Finally, at 4:02 a.m., a trucker came in looking for coffee. He sat at the counter for a few minutes, looking around for service. Then he got up and walked toward the kitchen, probably wondering where everyone was. 4:08 a.m. He came back into view, moving much faster. He grabbed the phone and started dialing. 911 most likely. 4:15 a.m. The police arrived. I watched Officer Williams and his partner enter the diner, talk to the trucker, then head toward the kitchen. 4:18 a.m. Williams approached the freezer door and pulled it open. What happened next? I've never seen anything like it. Amy came out first, stumbling like she was drunk or drugged, but she had her hands pressed over her eyes, fingers spread so tight that her knuckles were white. She was shaking so hard that Williams had to catch her to keep her from falling. Craig followed a few seconds later. Same thing. Hands clamped over his face, refusing to look at anything. He kept trying to turn back toward the freezer, like he wanted to go back in. Williams had to physically restrain him. Both of them were taken to the hospital, treated for hypothermia and shock. But physically, they were unharmed. No cuts, no bruises, no sign of sexual assault. Whatever those men had done to them, it wasn't physical. The freezer itself was empty. No evidence, no weapons, no sign of what had happened during those 37 minutes. Just some scuff marks on the floor that could have been from anything. I tried talking to Amy and Craig after they were released from the hospital, but neither one would say a word about that night. Amy quit the next day and moved back to her parents' house in Iowa. Craig lasted a week, then he just stopped showing up for work. I heard later that he'd joined some kind of religious community up in Alaska, the kind where you give up all your worldly possessions and spend your time praying. His wife said he'd become obsessed with keeping his eyes closed, that he'd sleep with a blindfold on and wouldn't even look at himself in mirrors. The police investigation went nowhere. The 2 men had paid cash, so there was no credit card trail. The security footage was too grainy to get clear facial features, and even if it wasn't, they'd been wearing baseball caps that shaded their faces. But the most disturbing thing? When I reviewed the footage more carefully, I noticed something that Officer Williams had missed. Those men. They'd been to the diner before. Not that night, but I recognized them from previous shifts. They'd been coming in for weeks, maybe months. Always ordering the same thing, always sitting at the same counter spots. They'd been watching, planning, learning Amy and Craig's routines, figuring out the best time to strike. But strike how? What do you do to 2 people in a walk-in freezer for 37 minutes that doesn't leave a mark on them but destroys their minds completely? I hired a new night crew, installed better security cameras, even put in a panic button behind the counter. But word got around about what happened. Business dried up almost overnight. People don't want to eat at a place where customers disappear into freezers and come out broken. I sold that location 6 months later. It took a huge loss just to get rid of it. The new owners turned it into a hardware store. Said they were going to seal up the walk-in freezer permanently, probably for the best. I still run diners, but I've never worked another overnight shift. Can't handle being in those empty buildings when the sun goes down. Always wondering if someone's watching from the parking lot, making plans, and sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about Amy and Craig, about what they saw in that freezer that made them never want to look at anything again. What could be so terrible that you'd rather live in darkness than risk seeing it twice? I don't want to know the answer to that question, but I have a feeling if those two men are still out there, someone else is going to find out. Whether they want to or not. She pressed the gun barrel so hard against my temple that it left a mark, and that's when I realized the crying girl I'd picked up wasn't running from an abusive boyfriend. She was running from something much worse, and now I was trapped in the car with her. My name's Tommy, and back in 1992 I was driving taxi in Sacramento. One of those jobs you fall into when you're trying to get your life straight after making too many wrong turns. I'd been clean for 2 years, working steady, even had my own apartment for the first time since high school. Sacramento nights were usually pretty predictable. Airport runs, bar pickups, the occasional fare to the bad part of town. I knew the city like the back of my hand. Every shortcut, every dead end, every street where you didn't want to be after midnight. That Friday started normal enough. Summer heat still radiating off the pavement, even though the sun had been down for hours. I was cruising down Broadway, looking for fares, when I saw her standing under a streetlight near the bus station. Young girl, maybe 22, 23. Long brown hair and wearing a light jacket despite the heat. She had that look. You know the one I mean, like she was running from something. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Need a ride, miss?" She practically dove into the back seat. Didn't even ask how much it would cost or where I was heading. That should have been my first warning sign. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaky. "Thank you so much." I didn't think anyone would stop. "Where to?" I asked, checking her out in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were red from crying, and she kept looking back over her shoulder like she expected someone to follow her. "The airport," she said quickly. "Can you take me to the airport?" "Sure thing. That'll be about $25. Is that okay?" She nodded and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. "This is all I have. Will this cover it?" Now, normally I would have said no. Airport runs were good money, and I wasn't running a charity. But something about the way she asked, the desperation in her voice, I couldn't just leave her there. "Yeah, that'll work," I said, pulling away from the curb. She sagged back against the seat like a huge weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "You have no idea how grateful I am." As we drove through downtown, she started talking. Said her name was Lisa, that she'd just broken up with her boyfriend and needed to get back home to her family in Phoenix. Standard story. I'd heard variations of it 100 times before, but there was something different about the way she told it. Her voice kept catching, like she was leaving out important details, and she kept checking the side mirrors, watching for something. "This boyfriend of yours," I said, trying to make conversation. "He give you trouble?" Her laugh was bitter. "You could say that. Look, I don't mean to pry, but if he hurt you, there are people you can call. Cops, shelters. You don't have to run away." "The cops won't help," she said quickly. Too quickly. "They never help." That's when I started to wonder if maybe I'd gotten the story backwards. Maybe she wasn't the victim here. Maybe she was running for a different reason. "Lisa," I said carefully, "is there something you're not telling me?" She was quiet for a long moment, just staring out the window as we passed through the industrial district on our way to the airport. Finally, she spoke up. "Have you ever done something terrible? Something you can't take back?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "We all make mistakes. Not mistakes," she said. "Something worse. Something that changes everything." The way she said it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There was something cold in her voice. Something that didn't match the scared girl who'd flagged me down. "Lisa, what happened back there?" She didn't answer, just kept staring out the window. But I could see her reflection in the glass, and she wasn't crying anymore. She looked different, calmer. like she'd made some kind of decision. We were about 10 minutes from the airport when she finally spoke again. "Stop the car." "What?" "Stop the car. Now. Look, if you're having second thoughts about the trip." That's when I heard the click, the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked right behind my head. I said, "Stop the car." She repeated, and now her voice was completely different. Cold, controlled, no trace of the frightened girl who'd gotten in. My blood turned to ice water. I'd been robbed twice before during my time driving taxi, but those were quick, desperate grabs for whatever cash I had in my wallet. This felt different, more calculated. I pulled over to the shoulder, my hands shaking as I put the car in park. We were in an empty stretch between the city and the airport. Nothing but fields and darkness on both sides. "Turn off the engine," she said, "and give me the keys." "Lisa, you don't have to do this." "My name isn't Lisa." The gun barrel pressed harder against the back of my skull. "And you're going to shut up and do exactly what I tell you." I turned off the engine and pulled out the keys, my mind racing. How had I misread the situation so completely? The crying, the story about the boyfriend, all of it was an act. "Good," she said. "Now turn around." Slowly, I twisted in my seat to face her and got my first real look at the gun. Small revolver, probably a .38, the kind that would make a very final statement at close range. But it was her face that really scared me. All traces of vulnerability were gone, replaced by something cold and calculating, like she'd done this before. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "You're going to forget you ever picked me up tonight. You're going to drive back to town, file a report that your cab was stolen, and you're never going to mention me to anyone. Understand?" "Yeah," I managed. "I understand." "Good." She reached into her jacket with her free hand and pulled out my $20 bill, the one I'd said was enough for the fare. "Keep the change." She opened the door and started to get out, then stopped and looked back at me. "Oh, and Tommy?" The fact that she knew my name sent another chill through me. I'd never told her what it was. "If you do decide to talk to the cops, remember that I know where you live. 1247 Oak Street, apartment 3B, right?" My mouth went dry. She'd been planning this, researching me somehow. "How do you—" "Doesn't matter how. What matters is that if I see my face on the news, or if any cops come asking questions about a girl named Lisa, well, let's just say your apartment has very thin walls. Wouldn't want anything to happen to Mrs. Rodriguez next door, would we?" Mrs. Rodriguez was my elderly neighbor. Sweetest woman you'd ever meet. The thought of her getting hurt because of something I did. "I won't say anything," I whispered. "Smart man." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Have a nice night, Tommy." She walked away into the darkness, just vanished between the rows of corn like she'd never existed. I sat there for what felt like hours, my heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, I started the car and drove back to town, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. Every set of headlights in my rearview mirror made me jump. Every shadow looked like it might be her. I didn't file a police report, didn't tell my dispatcher what really happened. Just said I'd had car trouble and lost a few hours. Nothing unusual for a beat-up taxi in Sacramento, but I couldn't stop thinking about her, about how perfectly she'd played the victim, how she'd known my name and address, how many other drivers had she done this to, and what had she been running from in the first place. 2 days later, I got my answer. It was on the morning news, a story about a body found in a downtown apartment. Michael Chen, 28 years old, discovered by his landlord after neighbors complained about the smell. They showed his picture, and my blood ran cold. He looked exactly like the kind of guy who would date a girl like Lisa. Clean cut, nice smile, probably treated her well. The news said he'd been shot twice in the chest. Small caliber weapon, probably a .38. The apartment had been tossed, like someone was looking for something, or trying to make it look like a robbery. But I knew better. I'd seen those cold eyes, heard that calculated voice. This wasn't random violence. This was personal. The police were looking for his girlfriend, a woman named Michelle Santos, who'd apparently vanished the same night I'd picked up Lisa. They had grainy security footage from the apartment building, showed a woman with long brown hair leaving around 9 p.m. Same build, same jacket, same walk. I stared at that TV screen for a long time, knowing I should call the cops, knowing I had information that could help them catch a killer. But every time I reached for the phone, I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, about those thin apartment walls she'd mentioned. She knew where I lived. She'd made that very clear. So, I kept quiet, went about my life, like nothing had happened. But it ate at me, knowing that somewhere out there, a murderer was walking free because I was too scared to do the right thing. I kept driving taxi for another 6 months, but I never picked up solo women at night again. Call it paranoia, call it smart, but I wasn't taking any chances. Eventually, I saved up enough to leave Sacramento altogether, moved up to Portland, got a job at a warehouse, something where I wouldn't have to deal with strangers getting in my car. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about her, about Michael Chen and what really happened in that apartment, about how easy it would be for someone like her to disappear, to reinvent herself in another city with another name. I wonder if she's still out there, still playing the victim when she needs a ride, still leaving bodies behind when she's done with them. And sometimes, when I'm walking home from work and I hear footsteps behind me, I wonder if she remembers a taxi driver named Tommy who knew too much but never said a word. The news said they never found Michelle Santos. Case went cold after a year, just another unsolved murder in a city full of them. But I know she's out there, somewhere. And if you ever see a woman crying at a bus stop, asking for a ride to the airport, maybe just keep driving. Trust me on that one. The cash register was untouched. Her purse still sat on the counter, but Sarah had vanished from the gas station without a trace, and the only clue was a single drop of blood by the back door that would lead us to discover something far more terrifying than a simple robbery. My name's Detective Jim Walsh, and I've been working homicide in Grand Rapids for 15 years. I've seen overdoses, domestic violence, gang shootings, all the ways people find to hurt each other in a mid-sized Michigan city. But the Sarah Chen case, that one still keeps me up at night. It started with a 911 call at 11:23 p.m. on a Thursday in October. The caller was Marcus Williams, regular customer at the Shell station on Division Avenue who'd stopped in for his usual coffee and lottery tickets. "She's just gone," he told the dispatcher. "Sarah's always here at night, but the place is empty. Her car's still in the parking lot. The lights are on, but she's nowhere." I caught the call because I was working late, following up on paperwork from another case. Missing persons usually go to patrol first, but something about this one felt wrong right from the start. The Shell station was one of those 24-hour places that catered to shift workers and insomniacs. Bright fluorescent lights that could be seen from half a mile down Division Avenue. Sarah Chen had been working the midnight shift there for almost 2 years. Reliable as clockwork, never missed a night. When I arrived, Marcus was pacing around the parking lot like a caged animal. Guy was maybe 60. Retired factory worker who'd become a regular at Sarah's station because she always remembered his coffee order and asked about his grandkids. "Detective Walsh?" He approached me as I got out of my car. "I know something's wrong. Sarah would never just leave like this." I could see what he meant as soon as I walked inside. The station looked normal. Too normal. Coffee was still brewing, The hot dog rollers were turning. Soft music was playing from the speakers. Like Sarah had just stepped out for a minute and would be right back, but her purse was sitting on the counter behind the register. Wallet, keys, and cell phone all inside. The cash drawer was closed but not locked. I popped it open to find over $300 in small bills, more than enough to make this worth someone's while if it was a robbery. "When did you last see her?" I asked Marcus. "Tuesday night. Same as always. I come in every other day around 11:15, get my coffee and a scratch-off ticket. Sarah always has my order ready before I even ask." He shook his head. "Something's happened to her, Detective. I can feel it." I called for backup and started processing the scene while we waited. The station had no obvious signs of struggle. No blood, no broken glass, no overturned displays. Just an empty building with all the lights on and nobody home. But as I walked around the counter, something caught my eye near the back door. A single drop of blood, dark red against the white linoleum, maybe the size of a dime. "Marcus," I called out. "Did Sarah have any injuries last time you saw her? Cut finger, anything like that?" "No, sir. She was fine." Asked about my grandson's baseball game, made jokes about the weather. His voice was getting more strained. "Detective, what aren't you telling me?" I bagged the blood sample and started checking the back door. It was unlocked. Unusual for a gas station at night. The door opened onto a small parking area behind the building. Employee spaces and a dumpster. Sarah's car was there. A blue Honda Civic that looked undisturbed. Keys were still in her purse, so she hadn't driven anywhere. But if someone had taken her, where was the struggle? Where were the witnesses? More officers arrived and we expanded the search, canvassing the area, talking to other late-night businesses, checking traffic cameras. But Division Avenue at midnight on a Thursday wasn't exactly bustling with potential witnesses. The security footage from inside the station told part of the story, but raised more questions than it answered. 11:05 p.m. Sarah was alone, restocking the cigarette display behind the counter. Normal routine. She'd been doing this job for 2 years and had her patterns down. 11:08 p.m., a customer came in. Middle-aged white male, wearing a dark jacket and baseball cap pulled low over his face. He grabbed a coffee and some chips, paid cash, exchanged a few words with Sarah. Nothing unusual about the interaction, but something about his body language bothered me. The way he positioned himself at the counter, like he was studying her more than making small talk. 11:12 p.m., the customer left. Sarah continued her restocking, straightening shelves, refilling the coffee station. 11:15 p.m. She walked toward the back of the store, heading for the employee area behind the counter. The camera angle didn't cover that section, blind spot that would become very important. 11:16 p.m., Sarah disappeared from view and never came back. Marcus arrived at 11:21 p.m. Spent 2 minutes looking around for Sarah before calling 911. The timestamp matched his story perfectly. But what happened during those 5 minutes when Sarah was out of camera range? And who was the customer who'd spent so much time studying her movements? I ran the footage back several times, trying to get a better look at the guy's face. But the baseball cap and poor lighting made it impossible to see clear features. All I could tell was that he was maybe 5'10", medium build, probably in his 40s. Could have been anyone. The blood sample came back as Sarah's, confirmed by DNA comparison with hair from her brush. But one drop wasn't enough to indicate serious injury, more like a small cut or scrape. The real breakthrough came 3 days later, when I was reviewing security footage from other businesses along Division Avenue. The pizza place 2 blocks down had an exterior camera that covered part of the street, and at 11:18 p.m. on the night Sarah disappeared, It caught something interesting. A dark van driving slowly past the Shell station, then turning into the alley behind the building. The same van appeared again at 11:24 p.m., pulling out of the alley and heading west on Division Avenue, right around the time Marcus would have been discovering Sarah was missing. I enhanced the footage as much as our tech department could manage, but the license plate was obscured and the make and model were hard to determine. Dark-colored, maybe blue or black, probably a Ford or Chevy from the early 2000s. Not much to go on, but it was something. I started canvassing the area again, this time asking specifically about the van. A few people remembered seeing similar vehicles in the neighborhood over the past few weeks. Always late at night, always driving slowly like the driver was looking for something or someone. The investigation stalled for almost a month. No new leads, no witnesses coming forward, no sign of Sarah anywhere. I worked other cases during the day but kept coming back to her file at night. Something about this one wouldn't let me go. Then we got the call that changed everything. November 23rd. A hunter found human remains in the woods about 15 miles outside Grand Rapids. Remote area, the kind of place where you could scream for hours and nobody would hear you. The body had been there for weeks. Animals had scattered the bones, but enough remained for identification. Dental records confirmed what I already knew in my gut, and it was Sarah Chen. The medical examiner's report made for grim reading. Cause of death was strangulation, but that wasn't the worst part. Sarah had been held somewhere for days before she died. Evidence of restraints on her wrists and ankles, signs that she'd been kept in a confined space. Someone had taken her from that gas station, kept her prisoner, and then killed her when they were done. But who? And why Sarah? The answer came from an unexpected source. Sarah's coworker who'd worked the day shift before her. There was this guy, she told me. Been coming in for months, always during Sarah's shifts. Never bought much, just coffee or a candy bar, but he'd hang around, try to make conversation with her. Did Sarah ever mention feeling uncomfortable? Yeah. She said he gave her the creeps. Asked personal questions, wanted to know her schedule, if she lived alone, that kind of thing. She started keeping a baseball bat behind the counter. Can you describe him? Middle-aged white guy, maybe 5'10", medium build. Always wore baseball caps and kept his head down. Sarah called him the midnight regular because he only came in late. My blood ran cold. The description matched the customer from the security footage perfectly. We started checking Sarah's phone records and found something disturbing. In the weeks before her disappearance, she'd been getting calls from an unknown number. Always late at night, always hanging up when she answered. The calls came from different payphones around the city, but they followed a pattern. Someone was tracking Sarah's movements, figuring out her routine. I put together a timeline. The midnight regular had been stalking Sarah for months, learning her schedule, her habits, her vulnerabilities. The night of November 15th, he'd finally made his move. But I still didn't have a name or a face, just a description that could fit thousands of men in Grand Rapids. The break came from an unlikely source. A traffic camera 3 blocks from the gas station that I'd missed during the initial investigation. At 11:19 p.m. on the night Sarah disappeared, the same time the pizza place camera caught the van turning into the alley. This traffic camera caught something else. The van's front license plate, clear as day. Michigan registration, ran the plates and got a name. Jeffrey Collins, 42 years old. Unemployed, living in a rundown apartment complex on the south side of town. I ran Collins through the system. No major arrests, but a pattern of disturbing behavior. Stalking charges that were dropped. Restraining orders filed by ex-girlfriends. The kind of guy who made women uncomfortable but never quite crossed the line into serious crime. Until now. We got a warrant and hit Collins' apartment at 6 a.m., but the place was empty. Looked like he'd cleared out in a hurry. Clothes gone, furniture abandoned. No sign of where he might have headed, but we found evidence. Lots of it. Photographs of Sarah taken from a distance. At the gas station, walking to her car. Even some that looked like they were shot through her apartment window. Maps with her address circled in red. A detailed schedule of her work shifts. And, in the bedroom, restraints that matched the marks on Sarah's wrists. Collins had planned this for months. Maybe longer. Sarah wasn't a random victim. She was a carefully chosen target. We issued a bolo alert and started checking with Collins' known associates. But the guy had no real friends. No family in the area. He'd been a loner, the kind of predator who operates in the shadows. 3 weeks later, Illinois State Police found Collins' van abandoned in a rest stop outside Chicago. He was long gone, probably using a different identity by then. The investigation went national. FBI got involved. Collins' photo was distributed to law enforcement agencies across the country, but he'd vanished like smoke, just another monster who slipped through the cracks. Sarah's family held a memorial service. Hundreds of people showed up. Customers from the gas station, co-workers, neighbors who barely knew her but were shaken by what happened. The kind of outpouring you see when a community loses its innocence. I still carry Sarah's case file with me, even though I'm retired now. Every few months, I get a call from some detective in another state. Thinks they might have found Collins, or someone matching his description. It's never him. But I keep hoping, because somewhere out there, Jeffrey Collins is probably watching another young woman, learning her routine, planning his next move. And maybe, if we're lucky, this time someone will catch him before it's too late. Sarah deserved better than what she got. She was just trying to make a living, putting herself through nursing school by working the midnight shift at a gas station. She should have graduated last spring. Should have been saving lives instead of losing her own. Instead, she's buried in Graceland Cemetery. Another victim of a system that can't protect the people who need it most. If you work alone at night, if you notice the same customer coming in too often, asking too many questions, don't ignore that feeling in your gut. Trust your instincts. Call for help. Don't end up like Sarah. I should have known something was wrong when the school called me at 2 a.m. asking if I could cover the night custodial shift, because the regular janitor had disappeared, and by morning, I'd understand exactly why no one wanted to be alone in those hallways after dark. My name's Kevin, and I'd been working as a substitute custodian for the Riverside School District for about 6 months when I got that call. Usually worked day shifts, cleaning classrooms, emptying trash, basic maintenance stuff. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady work and I could listen to podcasts while I worked. Night shifts were different. Paid better because nobody wanted them. Empty schools are creepy enough during the day, but at 3 a.m., with nothing but emergency lighting and your own footsteps echoing down empty hallways, that's a special kind of unsettling. Washington Elementary was one of the older buildings in the district, built back in 1953, with that institutional architecture that makes everything look vaguely like a prison. Fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered, linoleum floors that squeaked under your shoes, classrooms full of tiny desks that cast weird shadows in the darkness. The call came on a Tuesday night in December. I was already asleep when my phone started buzzing. Kevin? This is Janet from District Maintenance. I know this is short notice, but can you cover the overnight shift at Washington Elementary? Tony didn't show up tonight and we need someone there by 3 a.m. Tony Reeves was the regular night custodian at Washington. He'd been doing the job for almost 10 years. Quiet guy, kept to himself, but he was reliable as clockwork. If Tony didn't show up for work, something was seriously wrong. What happened to Tony? I asked, checking my alarm clock. 2:15 a.m. We don't know. He's not answering his phone and his wife says he never came home from work yesterday. Police are looking into it. But right now, we just need someone to cover his shift. The pay for emergency overnight work was time and a half. Money I couldn't afford to turn down. Yeah, I can do it. What's the access code? Janet gave me the details. Gate code, building alarm, location of the supply closets, standard stuff. Except for one thing that struck me as odd. Kevin, when you're doing your rounds, stick to the main hallways and the classrooms. Don't go into the basement unless it's absolutely necessary. Why not? Just trust me on this one. Tony always said the basement gave him the creeps. Bad wiring down there. Lights don't work right. Better to just avoid it unless there's a real emergency. I threw on my work clothes and drove across town to Washington Elementary. Empty streets and closed businesses making the whole trip feel surreal. The school sat on a hill overlooking the residential neighborhood. Dark windows staring down like empty eye sockets. The gate opened with a rusty screech that echoed across the empty playground. I parked near the main entrance and gathered my supplies. Cleaning cart, radio, industrial vacuum, the tools of the trade. The building alarm beeped steadily as I punched in the code. Then silence fell over the school like a heavy blanket. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim amber glow, just enough to navigate the hallways without walking into walls. My first job was to check all the exterior doors, make sure everything was locked up tight. Standard security procedure, but as I walked through the building, I started noticing things that didn't seem right. Classroom doors that should have been closed were standing open, displaying student artwork and bulletin boards to the empty hallway. Not unusual during the day, but Tony was supposed to close them all before leaving. Some of the lights were on, full fluorescent brightness in rooms that should have been dark, like someone had been moving through the building, turning things on as they went. And there was a smell, faint but persistent. Something musty and organic, like wet earth or rotting leaves. I tried Tony's radio frequency. The custodial staff all carried handsets so we could communicate during emergencies. Tony? You there, man? Static. Tony, this is Kevin covering your shift. Just wanted to check if you're okay. Nothing but white noise. I started my cleaning routine on the second floor, emptying waste baskets, mopping classrooms, wiping down whiteboards. Normal work that helped calm my nerves until I got to room 208, Mrs. Patterson's second grade class. Cheerful posters about reading and math covering the walls. But something was wrong with the seating arrangement. All the tiny desks and chairs had been pushed against the far wall, leaving a large empty space in the center of the room, like someone had cleared an area for... What? I checked my paperwork. No mention of any special events or room reconfigurations. Just standard overnight cleaning. I pushed the furniture back into its normal arrangement, neat rows facing the smartboard, and continued my rounds. But the feeling that I wasn't alone in the building kept growing stronger. It started with sounds, creaking that could have been the heating system but seemed to follow a pattern, footsteps echoing from somewhere below, too rhythmic to be pipes settling. Then, I started seeing lights. Not the steady glow of fluorescence, but quick flashes in my peripheral vision, like someone was walking through the building with a flashlight, staying just out of sight. By 4:30 a.m., I'd finished the second floor and moved down to the main level. The principal's office, the library, the cafeteria, all empty and quiet, but that smell was getting stronger, earthy and unpleasant, like something had died in the walls. I saved the first floor classrooms for last. Kindergarten and first grade rooms filled with tiny furniture and colorful decorations. Should have been the cheerful part of the building, but instead, it felt the most wrong. Room 104, Mr. Jackson's kindergarten class, had finger paintings covering every surface, but as I cleaned, I started noticing details that made my skin crawl. The paintings weren't just random kid art. They all seemed to show the same thing. Dark figures with elongated limbs standing in groups. Always in groups. Like children trying to draw something they'd seen but didn't understand, and they were all signed with yesterday's date. I checked the other kindergarten rooms. Same thing. Dozens of drawings showing tall, thin figures with 2 long arms and legs. Some of the kids had tried to draw faces, just black circles for eyes and mouths open in what looked like screams. What the hell had these children seen? By 5:15 a.m., I was ready to call it quits, but I still had one section left. The basement. Janet had told me to avoid it unless absolutely necessary, but part of my job was checking the boiler room and electrical panels. If something went wrong down there, the whole building could lose heat or power. The basement entrance was at the end of the main hallway. Heavy metal door marked authorized personnel only. My keycard opened it with a loud click that echoed through the empty building. The stairwell was darker than the rest of the school. Just one working bulb at the top of the stairs, leaving everything below in shadow. I grabbed my flashlight and started down, each step creaking under my weight. The basement was a maze of storage rooms, mechanical spaces and utility corridors. Pipes running along the ceiling, electrical panels humming with power. Everything looked normal, too normal, but that smell was overwhelming down here. Rot and decay so thick I had to breathe through my mouth. I checked the boiler room first. Massive heating unit that looked like something from the 1950s. Everything was running normally. Temperature gauges in the green, no warning lights or alarms. Then, I moved to the electrical room. Breaker panels and meter readings all showing normal operation. Whatever was causing the smell, it wasn't a mechanical problem. I was about to head back upstairs when I heard it. Voices echoing from somewhere deeper in the basement. Too faint to make out words, but definitely human. More than one person, maybe 3 or 4, having a conversation in hushed tones. My blood went cold. The building was supposed to be empty, and I'd locked all the exterior doors when I arrived. I turned off my flashlight and moved toward the voices, using the light from my phone to navigate the narrow corridors. The sound was coming from the far end of the basement, an area I'd never been to before. As I got closer, I could make out individual voices, all male, all adults. They were discussing something, but the words didn't make sense. The harvest continues. 7 more since the last gathering. The children see us now. Their drawings prove it. I pressed myself against the wall and crept forward, heart hammering so loud I was sure they'd hear it. Around the corner, lights spilled from an open doorway, casting long shadows on the basement floor. I risked a quick look inside, and immediately wished I hadn't. The room was full of people, maybe 15 or 20 adults standing in a circle, but they weren't normal people. They were wrong somehow, too tall, too thin, with arms and legs that bent at impossible angles. Just like the children's drawings, in the center of their circle was a table, and on that table was someone I recognized, Tony Reeves, the missing custodian. He wasn't moving. I stumbled backward, trying to process what I'd seen. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But as I retreated toward the stairs, one of the voices called out, "Kevin." They knew my name. "Kevin, don't leave us. The night shift is just beginning." I ran, dropped my flashlight and sprinted through the basement corridors, bouncing off walls and pipes in my desperation to reach the stairs. Behind me, I could hear them following, footsteps that were too long, too quick, covering ground impossibly fast. I burst through the basement door and slammed it shut behind me, hands shaking as I tried to lock it with my keycard. But the electronic lock wouldn't engage, just beeped error codes over and over. The footsteps were getting closer, echoing up the stairwell. I grabbed my cleaning cart and shoved it against the door, then ran for the main entrance. Had to get out of the building. Had to call the police. But as I reached the front doors, I realized they were already open and standing in the doorway. Blocking my escape was another one of them, tall and thin with arms that hung almost to its knees, wearing clothes that might have once been a custodial uniform. Its face was mostly human, but the eyes were completely black, and when it smiled, I could see too many teeth. "Kevin," it said in Tony's voice. "So glad you could make it. We've been waiting for a new member." I backed away, looking for another exit, another option. But they were everywhere now, emerging from classrooms and supply closets, surrounding me in the main hallway. All of them tall and wrong, all of them smiling with those terrible teeth. "The children see us during the day," one of them explained, "but we need someone to watch over them at night, to make sure they keep our secret." Tony tried to leave, another added, tried to tell people what he'd seen. That didn't work out well for him. They were closing in now, long arms reaching for me. I could smell that rotting earth odor coming off them in waves, the stench of something that should have stayed buried. I made one last desperate run, breaking through their circle and sprinting toward the emergency exit at the back of the building. The alarm shrieked as I hit the door, but I was outside, running across the empty playground toward my car. I didn't look back. I didn't stop running until I was inside my vehicle with the doors locked. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I drove away from Washington Elementary, I could see them in my rearview mirror, standing in the school's windows, watching me leave with those black, empty eyes. I called in sick the next morning, and the morning after that. Eventually, I just stopped showing up altogether, moved to a different city, got a different job, something that didn't involve being alone in empty buildings after dark. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder about those children's drawings, about what they're seeing during the day that makes them draw such terrible things. And I wonder if anyone else has been foolish enough to take the night shift at Washington Elementary. I hope not. But if you ever get a call asking you to cover for a custodian who didn't show up to work, especially if it's at an old school with a basement you're told to avoid, maybe just say no. Trust me on that one. Some jobs aren't worth the overtime pay, no matter how badly you need the money. And if you ever drive past Washington Elementary at night, don't look too closely at the windows. You might not like what looks back. Remember, if any of these stories gave you chills, hit that like button and let me know in the comments which one kept you up at night. And if you want more terrifying tales to fall asleep to, or stay awake to, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. Sweet dreams, if you can manage them.